This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Ugh. Yeah, it's one of those mornings. Well, I'll be honest, it was kind of hard to get the motivation to want to do this. Not for anything regarding the actual topic of the show. Although the King of the Ring pay-per-view we're going to talk about was the Drizzling Shites. It's more so some personal stuff going on in my life that I'm trying to keep under the radar. It's always hard when you're juggling so much at once and there's a lot of uncertainty about things. You're always planning for the worst and not entirely sure where to start or who to even go for help. I'm fine. Nothing wrong with me in particular, except for all the usual stuff. The antisocial bum that spends his entire life working, going to the gym, writing music, watching wrestling, and pretty much isolating myself from the rest of humanity. It's actually not that bad. Especially the older I get and the more society tends to pass me by. But that's part of why I do this. This parasocial world we call the internet, where I come on here, talk about classic wrestling, and try my best to entertain the viewers. It's always been part of the Five Starr Wrestling Report motto. We're the wrestling podcast no one knows but everybody needs. You're on YouTube and Rumble Mondays and Fridays for all kinds of fun coverage. It is a bright and early Sunday morning as I'm sitting down to record this for the Monday show. I'm definitely kind of digging this laid-back summer schedule right now. Sure, it's a little less monthly income I'm making, but yeah, sleep is definitely something I've been needing a bit more of. I tend not to sleep past 7 a.m. just because of how my body is wired. With the summertime, the sun is usually up by 6:30 Eastern time. So I'm typically awake by then. So y'all get to hear me grog my way through another retro WWF recap. And boy howdy, what a doozy this one was. I jumped the gun last week by starting to watch the pay-per-view a week before I was supposed to, figuring I had an extra 7 days to mentally prepare for it. Little did I know what was in store for me past the first match I watched. So what do you say we dive into this hyperbolic septic tank? I wish I had a toilet sound drop to go along with the gag. Unfortunately, I don't think iMovie caught on to inappropriate bathroom humor. So this King of the Ring 97 pay-per-view. Yeah, how about it? Were you all bout it at the time? I think I said the other week on the Go Home review we did, I remember effectively one thing about the entirety of this pay-per-view, and that was Hunter winning the tournament. The tournament that he was originally supposed to win last year, but well, unforeseen circumstances got in the way. Ego got in the way. But I've got to say, credit to Vince. Even though Hunter kind of drew the short straw in that whole Click debacle in MSG, the curtain call as it's notably called, he did punish him. It wasn't just a matter of them going with Austin to win the 96 King of the Ring instead. No, you remember from last year, they had Hunter in the doghouse for pretty much the remainder of 96. So you can't say they didn't reprimand him. I personally would have gone further with the burial if I were the booker, but then I would have had to answer to people saying that I was being flagrantly biased. All the 25 or 26 Triple H fans that there were last year. But aside from Hunter winning the 97 King of the Ring, the other two main attraction matches were either highly forgettable or just flat out boring and uninteresting. And then obviously we had the remainder of the tournament rounds to get through. Can't remember how I've done this the last few years. We've talked about the King of the Ring specials. The problem with going back and reviewing everything retrospectively is that because we already know who wins the tournament, it's not really worth belaboring the semifinal rounds. I mean, I took some notes on some of the particulars in the matches, but I didn't overdo it with the detail because we already know what the finishes were. I even remember Mankind making it to the finals. In terms of the opening two matches on the card, Triple H versus Ahmed Johnson opened the show, which I thought was a rather questionable call. Were they trying to lull people into a coma from out of the gate? No, they actually saved that for the Crush match later on. Here's basically what I got out of this. The people were super hot for Ahmed. It is the one factoid about Ahmed that I still can't get over to this day, is putrid as it is watching him try to work. I cannot deny the fact that he was a very, very over guy. He had a loyal fan base. The WWF fans loved them some Ahmed Johnson. As reckless and uncoordinated as he was still a spectacle to these people. So Ahmed spent the first several minutes beating the shit out of Hunter until he got cut off for the heat. I noted one spot where Ahmed nearly gave himself a hernia attempting a scissors kick on Hunter. And after Ahmed made a sloppy comeback, China ran the distraction so Hunter could take advantage and then hit him with a pedigree for the pin. It was every cut and paste Hunter finish since we've seen him and China become a pair. And on the scale of trainwreck Ahmed Johnson matches, this was passable. We also had the other semifinal qualifier, or not qualifier, just semifinal round. It was Mankind versus Jerry Lawler. And I've got to be honest here. The promo Mankind did beforehand was far and away more noteworthy than anything that took place in the match. It is just... It's so great when you go back and look at Foley during this time. Despite that they tried to keep him heel while he was in the middle of transitioning into the Dude Love persona over the summer, there's not a single person in these venues that boos him anymore. Precisely how Austin became a full-fledged babyface in '96 despite every attempt by the company to keep him heel. The same thing happened with Mick Foley the following year. They just could not get people to hate this guy. He was so damn entertaining doing this wacky gimmick. He's out there talking about how Paul Bearer left him for The Undertaker, what was supposed to be his biggest crowning achievement in his career. Paul decided to attain to other business. He says that there have been many different kinds of kings throughout time. The cruel kings that held their subjects down, and other kings that actually served their people and did what was right. So he's trying to get the fans' feedback on what kind of king they would like him to be. All of this, by the way, was getting Vince McMahon to pop on commentary. He could not keep a straight face during this entire promo. Do you even call it a promo? It was some form of long-winded diatribe. He also talked about Lawler and somehow got on the subject of real emperors not wearing clothes, to which Vince responded with, "Oh, that's not a pleasant thought." And he somehow concluded that the only thing more startling than having to see Jerry Lawler walk around naked is Mankind having to walk around buck naked. Then he told Lawler to come out and sock it to him. This is all much more interesting material than anything Lawler had to say. His promo consisted of him failing to belittle fans in the aisleway, most of whom were just happy to be on camera and completely no-sold him. Then he spent 3 minutes calling Foley ugly, fat, and a piece of shit, more or less. And then they proceeded to have virtually every Jerry Lawler WWF-style match we've seen since 1993. Meaning that it was perfectly fine old-school Memphis-style heat, but it was also the same exact match we've seen Lawler have in the WWF over the last 4 years. So there really wasn't a whole lot to say about it. He used the fake foreign object from his singlet on Foley. I liked when JR tried to call out the Turner Network on live pay-per-view by saying, "Glad to know we don't have to call it an international object up here." That was an inside joke that only hardcores would know about if you knew about the Turner regime in WCW, where you couldn't say foreign object on TV when you were talking about somebody using a gimmick. They did the floor spot where Foley took the back of the head bump into the guardrail. Did absolutely nothing to try to cushion the blow, by the way, because it was Mick Foley. The guy was fucking crazy. And after several more boring minutes of Mankind getting worked over, Lawler attempted to go for what I believe would have been his fourth pile driver in the match. But Mankind gave him a back body drop, which Lawler tried to turn into a sunset. Then Mankind reached down and slapped on the mandible claw for the submission. I know it seems like I'm probably downplaying the match drastically. In a vacuum, it was fine. But again, we already know who advances to the final round anyway. Personally, I was just so sick of Lawler at this point. I was a big fan of his work down in Memphis, but he really reached that get the fuck off my TV kind of heat with me by this point in 97. I was so done with him. Very predictable outcome, but they effectively set up Mankind versus Hunter for later on, which we will come back to. This is followed with a Brian Pillman promo in the locker room where he attempted to cut a heat promo on Stone Cold, explaining the whole rigmarole from Raw the other week where he backed out of his scheduled match with Austin for the pay-per-view so Shawn could take his place instead. Of course, with the caveat being that Pillman would wrestle Austin the following night on Raw. And so while he's in the middle of his promo, Austin shows up from behind and attacks him. It concludes with him giving Pillman a swirly in one of the bathroom stalls, which the camera filmed, by the way. Apparently, they just so happen to have a cameraman hanging out in that particular stall at that given moment. And he figured, hey, what the hell? May as well capture the moment in the act. It's funny, everybody. Potty humor. You know, we could never get enough of that shit in the WWF. Literally and figuratively. And then we had a match that I am not making up. On pay-per-view, unannounced, unadvertised, they did Crush versus Goldust. Perhaps in a deliberate attempt to see whether or not they could bore me into a coma less than an hour into the show. And they certainly came close. They had a below-average, middle-of-the-card TV match that probably would have caused most people to flip over to watch Nitro had it taken place on Raw. Crush worked over Goldust's back for about an hour. I think Vince and JR got so bored they started talking about the weather. They did a spot where the Nation Geeks tried to stalk Marlena on the floor so Goldust would go after them. Like a complete idiot, by the way. And so that led to Crush cutting him off to try to take advantage. And after attempting a shoot-off, Goldust countered a press slam and hit Crush with the DDT for the pin. I wrote down, absolutely pointless match. I have no idea what brain trust decided to give this 10 minutes of pay-per-view time. But it sucked. Thankfully, by that point, we had mostly moved away from all the inessential prelim tomfoolery. We had a 6-man tag with Psycho Sid and the Road Warriors taking on the Hart Foundation. And as you might recall from last week's Raw report, I had absolutely zero memory of Sid coming back to the WWF in the summer of '97. So you'll be surprised to hear that I also had zero memory of this match ever taking place on the 1997 King of the Ring card. I do have to say, though, something about the visual of Sid, Hawk, and Animal doing a pre-match promo in the locker room, it was hokey enough to where it fit perfectly on a WWF-style pay-per-view, but also believable enough to where I could totally buy that these three guys would actually hang out in real life. I don't know, seeing these three wacky, over-the-top personalities doing this short little promo, it worked. It was quite indulging, as a matter of fact. Once you overlook Hawk using the phrase, "by diddly-do squat." Not kidding, he actually said that. He talked about how revenge is a dish best served cold. And as Animal got in Sid's face and asked him if he would have their back tonight against the Hart Foundation, Sid matched Animal's level of intensity by screaming back. And he vowed that tonight would be the worst night for Owen, Davey, and Neidhart. And by Sid screaming at Animal from approximately 5 inches away from his face, spitting all over him in the process, well, he managed to convince the Legion of Doom that he was on board. Animal went, "I think this guy's for real, Hawk." And see, that is the exact reason why this pairing worked. We all know that Hawk and Animal's promos were uninterrupted, screaming, raging monologues back in the day. There's never been a promo those two cut that wasn't them just intensely screaming into the camera the whole time. So you put them with Sid, a guy who also spent the majority of his promos raging and screaming and hollering into the camera. Lo and behold, they meshed great. Like flies to shit, baby. Couldn't have asked for a better pairing. So I loved everything about this promo. By far my favorite moment on the entire show. Not even a question. And you know what? I'll say this about the six-man tag. I enjoyed this quite a bit. Probably a lot more than I should have. But I don't give a shit. I'm not going to say it was better than that 10-man tag they did the following month at the Canadian Stampede in your house. That would be disingenuous. I mean, that was a much smoother and better executed match, technically. No, trust me, this was far from a technically sound wrestling match. In actuality, it was very clunky at times. But there were still a lot of fun moments here for what basically amounted to a last-minute throw-in. I mean, they definitely didn't advertise this match on TV. Fuck, Sid just came back less than a week prior to this show. But you look at the overall atmosphere here. It had excitement. It had a big fight feel environment. Crowd was super into the babyface team here. And the thing I love too is that even though it wasn't the longest match in the world, they still packed so much action into it. They kept things moving. There was no downtime. They had a great pace. You could tell Sid was motivated too, which also helped. I know a lot of this might seem counterintuitive to a lot of the recent conversations we've had about the Road Warriors booking. You know, the fact that their matches in the WWF are always agented polar opposite of traditional LOD matches. The ones that got him over in the first fucking place. And like, even though they still had Animal and Hawk selling at certain points here, they at least gave the Road Warriors an outing. They weren't just going 50-50 with the Hart Foundation with wrestling moves. They had the Hart Foundation cheat and use a chair on Animal to weaken him and slow him down. They still had to use triple team illegal tactics to keep a foothold. So it was somewhat more believable in this case. It was the gang warfare mentality, and I mean, that's typically when the Road Warriors selling made the most sense. When they were getting beat up by multiple men at once. Because in most cases, that was the only time it was believable. That being said, it still wasn't a question. Sid was the most over star out of anybody involved here. Like, they cheered for the Road Warriors, but they fucking popped when Sid got in there. And as was the case for a lot of Sid's work, he never really had to do a whole lot to generate the kind of response from the crowd. All he had to do was make over-the-top facials and just be Sid. Plain and simple. I mean, like I said at the top, I'm not going to sit here and try to sell you on the idea that this is a match of the year contender or anything you need to go out of your way to see. But for me personally, this is the kind of professional wrestling that I still would like to see more of in today's climate, where you can just throw stars out there together in these basic multi-man settings with no gimmicks and no strings attached. Just have everybody go out, do their big signature spots, get the pops, and then take it all home in 10 minutes or less. It never has to be this elongated, convoluted 15-plus minute story arc where you go through these ebbs and flows of kickouts and near falls and dramatic turns of events. Ah, fuck that shit, dog. You don't need all that. Just put a bunch of stars out there and tell them to go out there and be wild and crazy. This is why modern wrestling to me just isn't fun anymore. Everything's too clean. It's too patterned. Nothing is spontaneous. Wrestling needs more impetuosity. I need to be able to watch something and not be turned off by obviously pre-planned or premeditated spots. The one thing I will say about this match, and again, I'm not claiming that this is a technical masterpiece. Hawk did get visibly blown up by the end, especially during his comeback. And when they did do the six-man free-for-all right before Owen went to give Sid the sunset roll-up for the 3, number one, Sid totally botched the spot and forgot to roll through when Owen went to grab his legs. So the finish got completely fucked up. And number two, the stuff leading to the actual finish was very spotty. So it's one of those double-edged sword analogies where I found a lot to like about this match. At the same time, looking back, omitting the hot crowd and the balls to the walls ring action, objectively, it was not a great match, or even a good match if we're trying to use fair-minded standards. That being said, and I know it might sound crazy, aside from the bulk of the Shawn Michaels Stone Cold match we'll talk about, this was probably the second best match on the show. And up to this point, it was the first match that I found reasonably enjoyable or worth paying attention to. I think we can all agree, if anything else, it was more enjoyable than Crush versus fucking Goldust, or Ahmed Johnson versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley in an 8-minute snooze fest. But now we can kind of phase into the upper card / main event portion of the pay-per-view. Let's start with the one that this event is most renowned for. The King of the Ring Finals. Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Mankind. And, you know, the thought hit me right before they did all the ring intros for this thing. When they went back and replayed the Steve Austin promo from last year's King of the Ring, it kind of made me realize in that moment, yeah, there was no way on God's green earth that Hunter winning this year would have topped last year. Not even close. Hey, guess what? I was right about that one. I would still make a critical argument that the wrong guy won the 97 King of the Ring. Even though it was 100% evident that Hunter was going over. Mankind absolutely should have won this fucking match. Especially when you take into account the reaction he was getting during this time. The problem for me is that it wasn't even the idea that Hunter winning would have generated heat. Because in order to do that, he would have actually had to have been over as a heel. Which he wasn't. The people were totally ambivalent about him. Like, I still can't wrap my head around the concept that they were actually considering having him win last year's King of the Ring. Much less the 97 King of the Ring. I'd like to hear if anybody had any particular retentions of the match itself. Because it was a total nothing burger. It wasn't bad, it was just completely devoid of interest. They did virtually nothing here, except for the closing few minutes. I think the crowd was still a bit fatigued from the previous 6-man, so they weren't really engaged. Even during the points when Mankind was in control. He did do the spot where he hung his neck up in the ropes, And if you know the full backstory about Foley's ear when he did that spot in WCW a few years prior, it's kind of easy to wince in seeing him attempt that spot again. We also got the classic Foley apron elbow drop onto the concrete. I mean, like, I don't want to shit on what they did here because it was okay. But there just wasn't anything special about it. For what was designed to be the selling point of the pay-per-view, it was a very run-of-the-mill match. Again, it did pick up a little bit at the end after Foley put the mandible claw on Hunter for the first time. I absolutely hated the follow-up spot where Chyna grabbed Mankind by the hair and yanked him out to the floor. That was completely preposterous. I can buy Chyna getting physical with a couple geeks like PG-13. I don't buy her being able to physically pry Mick Foley out of the ring by his fucking hair. I don't care how big her muscles looked. Foley was at a minimum 280 pounds. Logically, that shouldn't have even fazed him. But her involvement basically set up the closing series of spots where Hunter took advantage of her interference. First, he pedigreed Mankind through the announce table. At some point during them fighting on the floor, Mankind also lost his mask. Didn't even try to put it back on at that point. That was followed with Chyna breaking some kind of metal bar over Foley's back, which led to Hunter giving him the running knee off the apron. Probably one of the scarier spots here, it was Mankind falling backwards and landing right on top of the camera guy's leg. That had to have sucked balls. And then, well, in typical Triple H fashion, he does all of that shit to Mankind, gets him back in the ring, only to get a 2 count, and then he just picks him back up and gives him a standard pedigree for the actual finish. I love that logic. A pedigree through the announce table, a running knee lift where Mankind falls backwards off the apron and bumps onto the concrete, plus a gimmick shot to the back of the head with a metal gimmick. All of that shit isn't enough to keep Foley down for a 3 count. But a basic bare bones pedigree in the middle of the ring, that finishes the job every time. I get what they were going for with having Foley kick out of all that shit, trying to build up that killer instinct and show that he could valiantly fight back with all those crazy bumps. It just makes me laugh when he gets beat with a simple pedigree, just flat in the middle of the ring. By the way, that metal bar, I believe, was the scepter that Hunter was supposed to be presented with after he won, along with the robe and crown. So way to go, Chyna. You destroyed a third of Hunter's trophy. And we also had Hunter getting more heat back on himself after he beat up Mankind with the gimmicks and stomped a mud hole in him after Todd Pettingill presented him with all the stuff. Obviously, this is all done as a means to set up the Mankind-Hunter feud, which they continued pretty much all the way into the fall of '97. I think I've talked about this before, maybe not. On general principle, I'm usually an advocate of the heels winning the King of the Ring just because it's typically a good heat-getting device. The caveat being that you're actually over as a heel. I get why they had Hunter win. To me, though, it always seemed like the timing of it was off. The other important thing to remember, too, Hunter's about to drop the snobby rich kid gimmick when he does the DX thing later on, and he starts doing all the crotch chopping and the adolescent BS. By that point, the King of the Ring victory didn't suit the new gimmick at all. I understand why they went back on their original plans of having him win last year. But to turn around and just have him win the following year, I don't know. Did anybody else think it was bizarre timing? To my knowledge, I don't think they really highlighted the King of the Ring win all that much after the fact. Like I said, it won't be too long from now where he's showing up on Raw doing suck it promos. By that point, they completely did away with the robe and crown. I guess to be fair, I mean, if we're going by that logic, it's the exact same thing they did with Austin last year. Of course, Austin was never going to walk around with a fucking crown on his head. That wouldn't have worked at all. I don't know. It started to come off like the King of the Ring concept had worn out its utility by this period. I know they kept doing it for several more years after this, but I don't know. Like, I always liked the concept of it, but it definitely had a shelf life. Tell you the truth, I don't even remember off the top of my head who won the King of the Ring tournament in 1998. Or 1999 for that matter. And the funny thing is, I went to the 1998 King of the Ring pay-per-view. Because I was the one in Pittsburgh at the old Mellon Arena. The classic Mankind Undertaker Hell in a Cell match. I remember that. I do not recall offhand who won the King of the Ring tournament next year. Now my brain's going to start cognitively thinking about it. Oh, actually, no. Hang on a sec. I think I do remember. Wasn't it Ken Shamrock? I think it was Shamrock. Hold on, I gotta look this up now. Get that good old AI going here. Who won the 1998 King of the Ring? Ken Shamrock. Holy crap. He defeated The Rock in the tournament finals. Hey! Check that out. I remember shit. Okay, so I remember who won next year, but I promise you, after the fact, it's a total blur to me. I know one of the last ones they did before they dropped the concept for like a decade. I know Brock Lesnar won a King of the Ring at some point in the mid-2000s, but yeah. This is what happens over time when you consume a lot of wrestling. Everything starts to bleed together after a while. Especially when you watch a lot of shit like I did during the course of my 30-something years on this planet. Anyway, let's talk about this Heart Foundation promo real quick before we get to the next match. Yes, because what we absolutely needed on this pay-per-view was a certified top-of-the-hour promo segment on a Raw. It wasn't the first time, and certainly won't be the last. So all the crew came down so Brett could talk about how he's just about clear to get back in the ring to compete. He talked about how the men standing in the ring with him are men that he would go to bat for any day of the week. Men that he would shed blood with because they're family to him. And since the Next In Your House pay-per-view in July is taking place in Calgary, what better place for Brett to make his in-ring return than right in the heart of Canadian country? And I have to admit, that was a great heel line. Of course Brett was going to make his return in Canada. As he cuts this promo in fucking Providence, Rhode Island. Or wherever they were here for this pay-per-view. I didn't even care to check. But he laid out the challenge for a 5-on-5 tag. He wants the Hart Foundation versus any 5 WWF talents that are man enough to step up to the challenge. That was more or less the subject matter. He did at one point talk about how there will probably be injury excuses for the WWF stars coming into the match, including blown quads, which I presume is not a future pot shot at Kevin Nash, and or Vince McMahon, depending on how far you look into the future. Remember, Vince managed to tear both of his quads, so he still has a one-up over Nash. Then after they finished their promo, they all went over to heckle the announcers and try to take over the announce booth. That wasn't until Gerald Briscoe and Dave Hebner came over and gave them all the boot. They did not want them out there to do guest commentary for the Shawn Michaels-Steve Austin match. For some reason. I am still blown away by the fact that I don't ever recall this Austin-Michaels match taking place. And it's like, I mean, it's not even entirely unreasonable to blank on it ever happening. They basically told us in their pre-match promos, we don't want to do this match. We're the tag team champions. Yes, we don't like each other, but it's obvious that the Hart Foundation is playing mind games by trying to pin us all against each other. Shawn outright said, some people are expecting this to be an outright classic, and it probably will not be. That was almost a direct quote. Well, great. Then why the fuck should anybody care then? Now, I'm not going to underplay what they did here. I'm not going to say this is a classic, but it was still damn good. And I remember the WrestleMania 14 match also being very good. But this was, dare I say, an excellent professional wrestling match. Right up until the very end, which is sort of a euphemism for a lot of great matches we've seen in wrestling throughout the years. It all goes swimmingly up until the finish, and then it completely falls apart at the seams. Now, I put over that 6-man tag earlier and talked about how it was one of my more favorite matches on the card, but I don't think anybody would dispute my opinion that this was unquestionably the best match on the entire card. From a pure wrestling standpoint, nothing else came even remotely close. The setup to it was stupid. The story going in was dumb as fuck. But they both did a great job working the story of two guys that absolutely despised each other. You didn't have a definitive babyface or heel going in. Both guys were pretty much babyfaces in their own right. I did like the back and forth nature where both guys controlled the pace of things. It wasn't completely even Steven throughout. You know, Shawn did a lot more selling, especially in the middle. But it wasn't like him working with Vader when they did the monster versus scrappy underdog feud. But the people were into it. You know, they really laid into things here and treated it like two main eventers trying to settle a jealousy score. And I think that's why the people liked it so much. Because they bought it. They bought that these two legitimately shared a mutual jealousy toward one another. Now, I'm not going to analyze every spot here, but some of the more notable things that stood out. I don't know how many people are familiar with this match offhand, but the whole thing early on with the Special Olympian kid jumping the guardrail and trying to get involved, don't think that was storyline related. Certainly didn't look like it was pre-planned. Normally I'm good at snuffing out when they try to work angles like that. I think that was just a fan who was obviously on the spectrum getting involved, and, well, security managed to flag him down. I'm sure that was not a pleasant evening for the mom involved. I did audibly laugh when she tripped up the aisleway trying to chase the poor kid down. I know it was in bad taste, but it was a genuinely funny moment. Credit to the security, though. They treated that as best they could. They knew the situation they were dealing with, and they were very careful. So, I will give them props. I liked Austin mocking all of Shawn's poses throughout the match. Of course, most of the fans still popped, even though it wasn't supposed to generate a babyface reaction. They end up doing a series of spots where Austin exposed the outside ring mat so Shawn could take a couple bumps on the concrete. We did get some Shawn Michaels overselling at certain points. It wasn't Hulk Hogan levels of unprofessional, but still kind of eye-rolling. Some of the back and forth at the end was good when they were doing near-fall exchanges. Again, there was a lot to like about the action here. For about 21 minutes, it was the kind of hot wrestling action that would still get over in today's culture. Telling you, put this match on any modern pay-per-view today, minus the finish, people would still be raving about it till the end of time. It's just a damn shame that it had a lame-ass, predictable DQ finish. Because that in part took away from what the guys did here. And it wasn't even the double disqualification being the problem. I mean, in theory, we've seen that time and time again throughout wrestling. It wasn't the concept of the double DQ. It was how they did it. Because obviously they couldn't beat either guy here, which of course brings up a valid claim. Why the fuck do you book the match in the first place? Take it up with the booking team at the time. I certainly didn't co-sign this beforehand. But it wasn't even a cleverly done DQ finish. They just had both guys attack the officials until Earl Hebner came out and told both of them to go fuck off. I'll back up briefly for more context because it wasn't that surface level. First, they do the ref bump with Tim White. When Austin went to stun Shawn, he had the visual pinfall, but Tim was down selling. So Austin got pissed and laid him out. And then when Shawn went to hit Austin with the sweet chin music, Brian Hebner ran down to not count the pinfall that Shawn had on Austin, but instead he immediately went over to check on Tim. So then Shawn shit-canned Brian with a super kick, which, I mean, Shawn was justifiably pissed here. Probably would have done the same thing. But then you get the whole deal where Earl comes out and lambasts both of them for being unprofessional. So they both get disqualified. I guess the other thing I didn't like, and it's probably very nitpicky in hindsight, but I think the argument still holds water, especially for somebody like me that still values traditional babyfaces and heels in wrestling. They presented both of these guys on TV in more babyface-like roles, especially Shawn. Them laying out the officials and being unprofessional assholes like that, even in kayfabe, that's still kind of pushing it. Those are not babyface qualities. Austin, I can buy him doing something like that. But not Shawn. Even out of frustration. if they were going to book a finish like this, it should not have been done on pay-per-view. That's a main event finish you book on Raw as a heat angle to further along the story. People don't want to pay money to see crappy booked finishes like that. That wouldn't even been considered a good Dusty finish back in the day. So I didn't like it. I love certain aspects of the match. But now I think I see why I didn't really have a lasting memory after the fact. Other thing to keep in mind too is that Shawn's about to go away for a month after he and Brett get into that fight backstage at the Raw in Connecticut. I think that was the Raw the following night after the pay-per-view, correct? So yeah, they didn't even expand on the Austin Michaels angle. They just dropped the whole thing entirely and immediately segued right into the Austin Dude Love stuff. An unfortunate turn of events, depending on who you ask. And that left us with The Undertaker versus Farouk for the WWF title. Another match on this card that was seemingly forgotten about the moment it was over. Much like Farouk's aspirations to be the first black world champion in WWF history. I'm pretty sure Taker's entrance wound up being longer than the actual match itself. Where do I even start? You know, you think back to all the conversations we've had about this fucking Nation of Domination, that it's the single worst collection of doofus heels ever conceived by humankind. The first version of the group, not the second or third version. Is this match not the best example to prove that point? They made Farouk look like such a fucking geek in this match. I mean, hell, they pretty much made the whole nation look like geeks by the end of it. Between The Undertaker fending off everybody by himself with little to no issue, the fact that he basically kicked Ron's ass from bell to bell. The most memorable spot here was Undertaker doing the rope walk spot and nearly overshooting everybody on the floor when he went to land on the Nation. I can also blame the Nation for being out of position. They almost didn't catch him on the way down. You had Paul Bear in there being the heel manager in the babyface corner as he's standing across the ring from another collection of heels. Just more of that stupid 50 Shades of Grey bullshit where babyfaces and heels exist in a vacuum and you can't distinguish who's on whose side. Again, I know the story they're trying to currently tell with The Undertaker on TV. It's still incredibly stupid. Also stupid was everybody in the Nation getting into a fight on the floor for seemingly no reason at all, which subsequently led to the finish where, as Farouk got distracted and started yelling at everybody, Taker just casually walked over, he scooped Ron up onto his shoulders, he hit him with a tombstone, and that was it. That was how The Undertaker retained his WWF Championship. Their genius idea for a finish here. The Nation will get into a fight for seemingly no reason. Farouk will get distracted by this out-of-the-blue fight. And then he will eat a tombstone and lose. Because he's an idiot. And because they're still working the story with him and Paul, where Paul's directing traffic with The Undertaker and having him do his dirty bidding for him, he then has Taker chokeslam Farouk 3 more times after the match, until finally Ahmed Johnson of all people comes out to try to talk some sense into him. This did not go according to plan. A, because Ahmed tried to communicate words, and we all know how that usually goes. And B, he ended up laying out Taker with the Pearl River Plunge. His fans continued to pelt the ring with loose trash, which I guess you could say was an appropriate way to end the pay-per-view. Was The Undertaker laying motionless in the middle of the ring with a fucking empty Coke bottle by his head. I don't know. Obviously, they're setting up the Undertaker Ahmed program coming out of this. At the same time, Ahmed's also about to turn heel and join the Nation, which... Sure. At this point, what further damage could it possibly have done? Adding Ahmed to the Nation is like adding diarrhea to the top of a landfill. It's still going to be shit regardless. You know, this Undertaker title reign in 1997, gotta be honest, it's kind of ass. Like, you think about everything he's done as champion since WrestleMania. Every opponent he's had has been a random challenger of the month. He has not been the central focus of any of the top storylines on TV up until maybe the last few weeks when they reintroduced Paul into the equation. He's had a few successful title defenses, but have any of them been remotely interesting? And I say all this as a die-hard Undertaker fan. I loved the Undertaker gimmick back in the day, but goddamn, son. Even I have to call a spade a spade. And this Undertaker WWF title reign, it ain't it. It's boring. God, now he's about to enter a program with Ahmed Johnson. Jesus. Yeah, SummerSlam 97 can't come soon enough, everybody. That's all I'm saying. This is a bad, bad show. Terrible. For 20 minutes, Austin and Shawn tore the house down and worked their asses off. The only redeeming part of the pay-per-view, looking back. The other 2.5 hours was some of the worst wrestling I've seen from the WWF in all of 1997. And there's been plenty of bad shit, let me assure you. It's actually kind of amazing when you think back to the WWF throughout this year. For 8.5 months, this company was completely lost in the weeds. The absolute pits in terms of product delivery and overall presentation. And then, like, everything post SummerSlam was almost like watching a completely different company. They completely flipped the switch and turned everything around. Everything in the build-up to Montreal. We had the Bad Blood pay-per-view in October. We had all the Mick Foley stuff. Brett and Shawn. All the drama going on there. But you look back at the King of the Ring. It was the embodiment of every single reason the WWF was getting reamed out by WCW. Shitty TV prelim matches, bad finish decisions, a subpar main event with an incredibly dumb post-match angle, plus a King of the Ring final where the wrong guy won. You tell me what I'm missing. But that'll be our lead-in for the next Retro Raw. And that'll also conclude this Monday podcast. Got a full day off here, so I'm going to try to pace myself and attain to personal real life business. Gonna make some phone calls. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate everybody that comes back to check out the show every week, and talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace.